Hello again, I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. Today's episode is one that had me excited for weeks before we actually sat down to record. Michael Wilson is a Cincinnati-based photographer whose work is known worldwide. And long ago, before I lived in Cincinnati, when I was a radio DJ in Boise, Idaho, I knew Michael's name because his photos graced the covers of some of my favorite records, from Emmylou Harris's Red Dirt Girl, Rodney Crowell's The Houston Kid, Randy Newman's Songbook Volume 1, the list goes on, Alan Toussaint, The Replacements, the Neville Brothers, Loudon Wainwright III, John Hyatt, Joe Ely, Buddy Miller, David Wilcox, Al Jarreau, B.B. King, Bill Frisell. Oh, and just about every album cover by Lyle Lovett and Over the Rhine, and more recently, Jason Isbell's Southeastern, and so on and so on. I met Michael shortly after I moved to Cincinnati in the early 2000s. The first time I ever met Michael, it was in a group of people helping some common friends move out of a house in Norwood, which is kind of a city inside a city in Cincinnati. Somebody introduced us. I mentioned that I knew and loved Michael's work. He asked where I was from. I said Idaho, and Michael got this faraway look in his eyes. And later that day, I'd hear Michael from the third floor attic of the house shouting out, "Idaho," as if he was kind of trying on the word for size. I loved it, and it was endearing to me, and I have loved Michael since. Michael is undoubtedly a master. His photos have a quality that you can pick out from across a room. Something about them that makes you say, that is a Michael Wilson photograph. I've been so looking forward to talking to Michael for The Distiller because Michael is somebody whose work oozes from his pores. It's hard to imagine who or what he would be if he weren't Michael Wilson. And the kindness, the generosity, the genuine curiosity he brings to his work are inspiring and infectious. My favorite part of our conversation is hearing about the kind of ineffable thing that draws Michael to a picture or to a piece of music, and the way he both can't explain it at all and explains it perfectly. But kind of getting ahead of myself. Michael and I sat down on a Friday afternoon at maybe the most Cincinnati of all Cincinnati spots. Arnold's Bar and Grill on 8th Street is the oldest continually operating bar in Cincinnati and one of the oldest in the United States. It was opened in 1838, if you believe the stories. It was opened as a brothel and was then converted to a bar in 1861 by a former mobster and pro wrestler named Jim Christakos. Arnold's has been celebrated by the likes of Esquire magazine as one of the best bars in America. Cocktail guru David Wondrich stated, quote, "If Arnold's were in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, or Boston, somewhere in short that people actually visit, it would be world famous. It's a landmark, a national treasure, and it was the perfect place to sit down on a Friday afternoon with Michael Wilson and talk about work." I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Here is The Distiller with Michael Wilson. So when you were young, you started shooting photos when you were in high school, college?
Yeah, I honestly the photography happened not by any sort of effort on my part. It was I tried to make a short version of how photography became a thing to me. And that was during high school. One of my best friends in high school, and he's still a good friend, he lives in Los Angeles. He took pictures for the school paper, and his name is Dan Wickemeyer. And but so just hanging out at Dan's house, we go just to hang out. I would just go to hang out with him, and he would say, "Oh, I forgot, I have to make a picture for the school paper. So let's run down the darkroom," and I was sort of like accidentally introduced to photography. He had a darkroom in his home because his dad had been a photographer in World War II and had a darkroom, but I thought that was interesting. Sort of I didn't occupy much retail space in my shelves, whatever. But all through high school, I was sort of mildly I was stuck on the French horn, is what it was.
Uh-huh.
I love the carry the thing around. I love the idea of playing it when I should have been listening to Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. I was listening to my 4 Dennis Brain French horn records over and over. That's all I did was like think about the French horn. But the weird thing was I couldn't play it. I was in high school band. I don't know if you're familiar. They have like first chair, and then they have like, well, I was perpetually whatever the last chair was. If there were 5 of us, I was always, and I think I was the kind of person, maybe it's because I was small in stature, and they thought maybe I looked breakable or something. No one ever like bothered to say, you know what, maybe you shouldn't take this so seriously, because if somebody had just said like, you're really not good at this, because all through high school, all I did was sort of like fixate on the French horn, and I worked at the Burger Chef on Montgomery Road there, or where the Chipotle is now. That was a Burger Chef. Anyway, saving up money for this French horn, which cost $800 at the time. And I did. I wound up saving up $800, and that was about the exact same time my last year. It was at the end of my senior year of high school when it sort of dawned on me that I couldn't play the French horn, and so
was that a progressive realization, or was there one incident where you realized this isn't a good idea?
It was progressive, and I just loved sort of, it was, I don't know what that was all about. It was like it's going to remain a mystery to me. But anyway, it was gradual, Brandon, but once it sort of occurred to me, a couple things happened really fast. This was like the spring of, when you're finishing up high school. My brother was 4 years older than me. He was graduating from college, and he had started playing playing guitar in college, and he got pretty good pretty fast. And he came home one weekend and said he wanted to buy a Martin D28, which was $600. And I said, I have $800, so I loaned him $600. He bought a Martin D28. This is 1977.
Wow. And
he still has it. It sounds great.
Yeah.
But,
and that guitar is
it's worth a lot more.
No, I know what. As a guitar player, I know what the D28s cost now.
Yeah. But he paid me back too, and but I had $200 at the time. I had $200 in left over, so I went to my friend that was Dan, who was the photographer. Said, "How much would it cost to get a camera?" So honestly, my buying a camera had more to do with this $200 burning a hole in my pocket,
right? And
I felt like I'd earned it. Something.
You had. I mean,
so so I gave up the dream of the French horn, and I bought a camera, not because I love photography, but because I wanted to buy something.
Yeah.
And so this story's not getting shorter, is it? Anyway, so
we've got plenty of time.
So what happened then was, like I said, this all happened fast. The last day of high school, they called me out of homeroom and says, "Do you have any plans for college?" And I said, "No." And they said, if you were offered a scholarship to Northern Kentucky University, would you go there? I said, sure. So, and what had happened at the time, NKU was looking to like build interest. So they gave a scholarship to every high school in the city, I think. And all you had to do is maintain a B average, and it would so it seems crazy now that I got that lucky, because I had failed math in high school, but one of my older sisters had gone to school with my math teacher. So my F became a D, and I became I got an academic scholarship to NKU.
That's so good.
So I get this academic scholarship not on academic grounds, but honestly because no one at my high school wanted to go to NKU. At that time, it was a commuter school,
right.
And the people that I know wanted to go to college wanted to go away.
Right. And for people that don't know, the geographic setting of Cincinnati is directly across the Ohio River from Northern Kentucky. So Northern Kentucky University, what is that actually in? It's not
Highland Heights.
Highland Heights, Kentucky, which is just across the river.
Yeah.
So it's basically in Cincinnati,
it is.
Although not right in the city.
So I am gifted with this, and then I got there, and the gifts continued to unfold, because I remember a kindly sort of older professor that was you line up and they show you the catalog and what do you want to study, sign up for your first classes, and he said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, honestly, I hadn't been planning on going to college. So for some reason, he asked me, "Do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "Well, I just bought a camera." So he flips through the catalog and finds, "Oh, we have photography. Oh, we have a photographer. You can major in photography here." So,
Congratulations, you're a photographer.
So yeah, he said, "Well, you can major in," and I thought, "Okay, great." So I got a camera, and then he said, "Well, it's a fine art major. Would you be interested in being an art major?" And I never had any art classes in high school or anything, but I thought, sure, whatever, yeah. So I became, and in that first semester, I wasn't able to get into a photo class. So my first class was drawing, and I was way in over my head, but too overwhelmed to fight against it. But the second semester of that first year was really important for starting something in me, because the teacher there still lives in the area, Barry Anderson. I attribute him with sort of basically pulling back the curtain on the history of photography, which was something I was totally oblivious to. I had no idea that, even in the late 70s, there were too many photographs in the world, but there's so many that I didn't even think about them. I thought, and honestly, if I had to think about it, I would say, I guess photographers work for newspapers. I wouldn't, but I didn't even think that thought. But when I realized, when he showed us the work of 150 years of people that had been spend their life's energy making photographs, I was like, that was changed everything for me.
Who did you like? Who grabbed your attention?
Well, there were many, but I'll recall one as sort of like a very specific example, and a photographer who's still living named Bruce Davidson, and I still have I actually have the cassette accompanied film strip that was shown. I still remember watching. It was one of those. The cassette would play, and then it would beep, and the next picture would come up, and in this case, it was a series of film strips where the photographers were talking about their work, and I remember the Bruce Davidson film strip, and I had this sense, almost like, and I think I might be have how if you have a dream and then you start talking about the dream, after a while, if it was a dream that made enough an impression that you have told it a couple days out, you're not so sure how attached that telling is to the actual dream.
Right.
So, but this is how I remember that feeling. Mm-hmm. What I remember the feeling like is like sort of like rocks being sort of placed on my chest, like every time it would beep, and like it was like a heaviness in a good way, like wow,
it was getting in there.
Yeah, it was like a weight, landing on me.
Wow. And you're 18, 19 at this point.
Yeah.
When did you first get the sense that you might be any good at it?
That's a good question.
And how?
Pardon me. I know I got encouragement at NKU. There was at that time, it was a really good environment to be in. It was a small program, but there were, I wound up over those 4 years living with 4 or 5 other people in different places in Covington and around town, where we were all sort of equally sort of just hell-bent on making photographs. And so I was definitely receiving encouragement from that, this sort of group of peers who was also feeling like, because now when I look back, photography sometimes it's hard to feel like it matters or it makes sense, but at that time we were in a really sort of like wonderful incubator, safe from those chilly winds of like, well, how does this matter?
Yeah.
We were in an environment where like this matters.
Yep.
And we care, and so I was getting encouragement there, certainly from Barry Anderson, the teacher, and other teachers there that would come through. Mm-hmm. You would have encouragement. You would also have the realization that, gosh, I don't think they really liked my new work or whatever. So but if I thought I That's good. I'm sure it was somewhere in that period, and I've received, I think, the problem with, not the problem with encouragement from outside is sometimes it's hard to hear it. I know I was receiving it, but I tend to sort of like automatically sort of like not put that on in a safe place. So, but I'm sure I was getting in there.
But it sounds like as well, the environment that you were in with your friends was sort of feedback, good or bad, wouldn't have necessarily gotten through. You guys were doing your thing and we're pushing forward and we're making each other better. Yeah. Was there, so you said that this started because the NKU people said, well, do you have any hobbies? So photography is a hobby to you. Yeah. What's the transition and how long does it take before that hobby becomes, this is my work?
That happened. It's almost at that point, I've been thinking about this because we got these goats, right? And
what are your goats' names?
Mary Poppins and Clover, but we didn't name them. Okay, I'm thinking a lot about this. I've never been a shepherd, and I've never been around shepherds, but there's a verse in the Bible that has always thrown me, and it talks about it's referencing this thing about shepherding, and it's one of the Psalms. It talks, "I will guide you with my eyes," and I thought, that doesn't really make any sense. How if you have animals, you don't sort of secret message them, hey, go over there and
give them a look, give them a raised eyebrow.
But I think what happened for me was photography almost became like a shepherd to me. At that point, early on, I think I started following. Okay, and so I'm trying to get back to the idea of the eyes and the shepherding, because when I'm out with the goats, I go where I want to go, and the goats will follow me. So I am going, and then if I see there's danger or something, I will lead them somewhere else. Right. So in that sense, I would say that pretty immediately at that sort of from that sort of first sort of introduction, puppy love sort of phase of photography, it became sort of a shepherd that I started following.
Really quickly, you were taking it super seriously.
And yeah. So yes, very much so. And I wasn't thinking about how that would impact my life or making a living, but I knew that was what I was going to follow.
I don't know if this is a weird question, do you remember the first time you ever got paid for a photograph?
Yes. In the vaguest ways. It would have been in college. It would have been pardon me, after that first year of, I think I would have sort of foisted myself on the paper in Norwood, which was called the Norwood Enterprise, and I would have taken pictures of a 4th of July. I forget. I'm sure that I got paid something for that. I'm not sure what it would have been. Also, about that same time, I would have gotten my uncle was a union boss for the asbestos workers, and my dad and all his brothers all were pipe covers, asbestos workers. So I know once my uncle found out that Don's son is studying photography, he would I would get to take during the summer, I would take picture of a construction site that they would put. So I forget. I'm sure I would have got. So those would have been small, little things I would have gotten paid for. Yeah.
Sort of knocking around, just taking photos whenever people needed them. Not necessarily art photos, but
yeah. And I began doing, work for in trade for money early on, but very few of those pictures are ones that I would want to remember.
Do you hold on to any older photos?
Yeah, I have lots of them. For a while there, when I first decided I was going to try to make a living as a freelance photographer, this was a good sort of number of years after I've actually been out of college, but because I didn't go become a photographer on my own right after school. But in, 1987, I did decide that I was going to try to be living as a freelance photographer, and I kept a box, and I still have it of these sort of like really embarrassing things I did. It's really not worth even like trying to put into words, but I still have them, and they're in a folder that says "He who humbles himself is wise." But yeah, I've done a lot of things I did. And it was I'm learning.
Yeah. What was the decision when you decided in 1987 to say, this is my profession, I'm going to be a freelance photographer? How did that come around, and what did that mean to you to take that jump?
That was born out of a what do you call it? A collision of frustration and desire. Maybe that's the way all life happens. But I had been working after college. I knew I loved photography. That was never in question. I wasn't sure how that would play out in my life, and I didn't really. And Marilyn will tell you this. It makes it hard to be around me, as I don't really think through things very much, and I certainly didn't think through how I was going to make a living. But at that time, since my degree was in photography, but was in fine art, so it's basically like if you had an undergraduate degree in drawing or painting. So it was not a very job-friendly degree. Right. The logical sort of, if you want a career path from there, the obvious path was to go to graduate school and pursue a career as a teacher. So that was pretty much, as a fine art photographer, the classic way you can survive doing this is teach photography and do your own work. And I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher, and I knew I didn't want to go to graduate school. And I was really curious, would I still make pictures if no one's forcing me to? In school, I knew I loved it, but if no one was like forcing, if I didn't have to show work for a critique to get a grade, would I still make pictures? And I think that was what I really was like, the big question when I left college, got out of college, was like, am I still going to make pictures? Yeah. And the truth is I did, and I published a book of that work, sort of self-published in 1984, that I still feel good about. But
what was that book called?
That book is called Heads Bowed, Eyes Closed, No One Looking Around.
Yeah.
And it's so I worked after, and that was made up of pictures that I made sort of in that period right after school, just walking and photographing. And I kind of, I think maybe subconsciously chose work that was not photography related. I worked as janitor and worked in kitchens, not cooking, but washing dishes and stuff. And it wasn't very taxing on my mind, but then eventually I had this darkroom skill, so I got it. I got some jobs closer to photography. Eventually, I spent 4 years working for a textbook publisher called Southwestern Publishing. They had an in-house photography studio. This was the early 80s. The world was real different. And this sort of textbook publisher had this like big photo studio. They would handle all most of their photography needs in-house. They had a staff photographer, and I was did all the darkroom work and the assisting. And those 4 years were really good, but I was spending every day involved in photography, but realizing like I am I am less and less and less and less interested in photography. The more time I was spending here, because
you're not making your own pictures,
right?
You're just
and I was realizing that I was using some of the same tools and skills, but in a way that manifested in pictures that I didn't care about at all. And at the same time, I would spend most of my spare time in record stores just looking at records. And so I would be flipping through, spend an hour at the record store, and I would just like see a beautiful photograph. Maybe it would be a Robert Frank photograph on a cover of a record, or I'd see a Joel Meyerowitz photograph, or I see people whose work, or a really great sort of portrait by someone like Norman Seeff or Annie Leibovitz, or just beautiful pictures. And I would think back where I'd just spent the day doing pictures that I didn't. I think like, well, there's people getting to make pictures that I do care about, So very slowly, that the frustration of being around pictures I didn't care about, but seeing pictures out there that were related to the kind of picture that I was in love with, and fortunately had a friend then, who is still a good friend, named David Sheldon, who's an illustrator, and he had gone freelance as an illustrator a year before I went freelance, and he was somebody that, he knew how I cared about photography, and he would hear me sort of like moan about this, and I think I eventually just sort of vented some childish jealousy that, said like why do other people get to do these kind of pictures and I don't get to? And he said, well, have you ever told anybody that you want to do this? And I said, no. So he, I started paying attention specifically at like the record stores, and I would at the time, you're looking at LPs, and most of the credits were on the back. So even if you didn't buy the record, I'd pick up a record just for its cover, see who played bass, who produced it, where it was recorded, and I would also see who made the photograph and who the art director was. And there was this recurring name that popped up on a lot of the records that jumped out at me just like from the image. And it would be different photographers or different kinds of covers, but this one name kept showing up as the art director. And so I made a note of it, and I made her name is Jerry Hayden, and that's all I knew. And she worked at Warner Brothers. So I made a small hand-bound book of about 10 portraits, and with my friend David Sheldon's encouragement and with Marilyn sort of binding this book together for me, I just looked up her address and sent her a book and said I enjoyed. So that was like probably one of the smartest things I ever did, was actually sort of like A, doing something, and B, sort of letting someone know about it.
Getting it out there.
And she was kind enough to write back. I've jumped ahead in the story, Brandon.
Oh, it doesn't matter. No, this is the story.
But the frustration eventually led to, at the workplace, what happened was, by that time, I was married in '85, and our only expense was our apartment and my truck I had. So when my truck was paid off, for some reason, I decided that was when it was time to go freelance, because that was my last recurring payment.
Bills dropped.
And so, and I remember going to the exit, what they called an exit interview at the place where I worked, and they were very nice. They go, well, we wish you good luck. What is your business plan? And I thought, I don't have a business plan. I just know my truck's paid off, and just like, and so that first year, the first calendar year that I was freelance, I made $3,000, I think, the whole year.
Wow.
So it's not gotten much better, but it's but anyway, but young people should make plans, not do it. But anyway, so 2 years into this freelance thing was when this So I quit the job in '87, and I did just basically, I would walk door to door to designers in Cincinnati and sort of like, and it was, I realized now how fortunate I was that this was pre-digital, so there was still a need for people that could even do rudimentary photography.
Right.
I mean, like where you required somebody that knew at least how to process film or do something. So I was able to get some work. A lot of that work wound up in that folder I told you about. Work that I would never show. But a couple years into that, when I finally did reach out to this name, that's all it was to me at the time, Jerry Hyden at Warner Brothers, with a book of portraits that I did care about. And at that time, I had been photographing a lot of local musicians just because I love music. So there were mostly musicians in this book. She wrote back, and that led to photographing a band called the Bodines, who was on tour. And that wound up being used for a record they put out. And
You talked a little bit about like working on photos for that company that you didn't care about, and then seeing photos that you did. What makes you care about a photo? Whether it's yours or somebody else's, can you put that into words? Is there something when you see something that puts that weight on your chest?
Brandon, that's a great question, and one that probably one of your guests will maybe be able to answer. It exists sort of in that same place that when you hear a song or maybe a piece of music, and it just sort of like you realize that there's something else going on in the world that matters more than somehow it's like no, I'm not going to be able to put it into words, but it exists in the same place, and it's going to be the thing that moves me in a photograph may be different than the thing that moves someone else. Like music will affect different people, but it exists in that same place where music that moves me or words that move me, sort of like, is it that they sort of like these are moments that sort of like pierce the dullness of our, sort of like the complacency or the roteness of our life. I don't know.
The breakthrough. Somehow.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, I guess what's inherent in your answer is it has nothing to do with technical precision.
No.
Like, they really nailed the. Boy, that's real sharp. Or
no,
boy, that's like.
And I can appreciate that, but no,
Sure.
That's not what. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that translates into, are there instances where you see images that take your breath away that are not by professional or skilled or master photographers?
There's a really, really beautiful book that's a testament to that. And also probably shoe boxes all over the world filled with photographs that were just like done in offhand ways, in honest moments of people's lives that now we're separated from those lives, but you've got this artifact that somehow then like just starts something spinning in you when you see it. But there's the book there's a lovely little book called Photo Trouvé or whatever, the French word for found. And it's just a collection. Somebody has beautifully sort of curated, found photographs, and it's like, it is it's a really powerful. It's probably as powerful as any of the photo books by my favorite photographers.
Let's talk a little bit about how you work, because I think my sense originally was you get a commission. I mean, you've done a lot of studio portraiture, some of it on album covers and some of it not. But it sounds to me like just as much of your work is just wandering around the neighborhood, taking a lot of photographs and finding something beautiful.
I think you're exactly right. And the interesting word there is work. I mean, it's like if photography is this sort of like thing I'm following, this shepherd I'm following, it's like certain times I've found myself following that shepherd into places where I'm doing, I am totally doing a dance that I'm paid to dance, you know. Other times I am just like dancing just because I'm so happy to be someplace, you know, just like, and I think both are valuable things. Like thank goodness there are like firms even in Cincinnati that maybe there will be maybe they're financial advisors and they want, someone to come in and make pictures of all their employees, and I go in and I'll do that in as honest as in as careful way as I can. That's very that is work as a photographer, but then to just but that's not, I can't sustain that for very long without the moments that you were sort of describing, where I am just going and sort of like listening to the world, just sort of like and sort of
Is that a practice that you have? Is there any intention or rhythm to how many days
a
week you just go out with your camera?
No, and sadly, there was there was a time when you couldn't have stopped me from putting film in the camera and walking. And now that is not the case. But once the film is in the camera and my feet are underneath me and I'm on the sidewalk, I feel the same. I know this is what I do. So I have, over the years, I've used different artificial, I guess, architectures to support, and sometimes I've been like I've walked certain streets. Like more recently, I've been photographing State and Beacon streets on the west side of Cincinnati, and I will just walk. Not to say anything about that neighborhood, but just it's a place I know, and I can just and then unfortunately, sometimes people ask me to like sort of like, and I've recently a mutual friend, Rich Hordinsky, is
which was on our third episode of the podcast.
Yeah, is asked me to sort of take that sort of sensibility to the neighborhood that he lives in, Walnut Hills. So I've just been, and that feels really good. I don't know if the pictures are any good, but I know that when I've been walking these streets and just, it's this, active listening, I guess, with your eyes. Mm-hmm. It feels like no one benefits from this. No, but it feels like this is the one thing I do that makes sense. And which is weird. I can't quite square those things. But like, why does the one thing that makes total sense to me, like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, no one benefits from this? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people would argue. It reminds me of that Elvis Costello song, like "All This Useless Beauty." I don't know if it's a song or an album title, but it's. I think a lot of people would argue that it has great benefit. How is that process of wandering around the neighborhood and how you think about the photos that you're trying to make in that setting different from when you are, working with a musician? Yeah. I know you've done a lot of stuff for Lyle Lovett, and you just John Hyatt and different people. Yeah. How's your approach different in those settings?
First of all, and also the nature of the maybe it's just in the basic difference of those two kinds of call them conversations. One is sort of a basically a conversation when I'm walking a street and photographing. Just I am basically in conversation with myself. I am, I don't want to say meditating, but I am the all the voices I'm hearing or whatever, but I'm not responsible to any other party in this conversation at the moment. And but when I'm doing a portrait, it is very much about the thoughts are guided by our sort of connection together, just like this conversation is being formed by, we are tethered by our words. When I'm doing a portrait, I am tethered to a person and I love that. I think of it like this. I have thought of it like this. I have a tractor, and I got this tractor so I could plow this little farm I have. The tractor is my photography, making photographs. But sometimes I get hired, my tractor and me get hired to pull floats in parades. So that's when I'm doing, I don't mean to make that sound like not a good or not an honorable thing, but I love, there are certain floats that I love to pull through parades. I mean, and what a photographer does is really a really small part of that, but it's fun to get to be involved with people. And I love music, so for me, that's like always been like a beautiful gift to be able to like have some sort of little attachment to somebody whose work that you care about very much.
Right. And I think, for somebody who might be listening, who loves to take photographs and might be younger, it might seem like somebody who's done the body of work that you have done gets to kind of make all your own choices at this point, and you sometimes have to pull the float, and you can find ways to enjoy pulling the float, even if that's not what you might want to be doing. That day.
Yep.
Which is probably good to hear.
And the nature. Most of the portraits that I do for music there's pictures for music happen in different ways. They can happen sort of candidly, like in concerts, or maybe like if in the spirit of some of the Jim Marshall pictures where maybe somebody's living their life with these musicians and they're basically with them 24/7, or for magazines and editorial things where like or for the when you're in cahoots with the record company and that's sort of where I have mostly been involved, where I am involved, where they want to work with me because we are here. Whereas sometimes I remember doing a editorial shoot for what was that? Remember that band D-Light? The Groove Is in the Heart. Anyway, I remember shooting them, but it was for a magazine. It was on the first time I realized, it's. How lucky I was to be on the others, introduced to these musicians from the inside, from their working on for their record cover, because that was the first time I was like, and they were at a place where like the magazine wanted a picture of them, but they didn't necessarily want to work with. And I remember being like sort of like not really abused, but like almost abused. And I think like, oh, this is no fun at all.
They weren't happy to be there for you at all.
Yeah, this was like, this is not fun.
Yeah.
This is not a conversation. This is like somebody avoiding me. Like,
Yeah, no, I know that experience well. My when I was in radio years and years ago, like so many of those interviews feel like they're just what they have to do in order to satisfy the publicist or to satisfy the label, rather than what they want to do to be true to what they're doing.
So maybe I have a really sort of privileged sort of experience with some of these people, I guess, because I have.
And you've also developed some meaningful relationships out of that. I mean, I think I think you and Lyle Lovett have a long time working relationship together. That sounds to me like it's more than just a working relationship. It's a friendship.
Yeah, that's the very best thing, Brandon. You're right.
I don't want to ask you if you have like favorite pictures, because that seems to me like asking who of your kids is your favorite. But
I know which kid's the favorite.
Oh, well then tell us that story. I won't tell him, I promise.
No.
But do you have a we can talk about that afterwards, and I can put my guesses down for who it might be. Do you have a favorite experience? Is there something that comes through that, like a story that you can tell?
I have several wonderful experiences, and it's funny, they really don't have a photograph that is attached to that memory that feels so pleasant. you know how you sort of like feel swelled up inside sometimes, like, oh, you can't, like, I remember a couple of those. One was, I was in a little tiny motel room in Brussels, and I was photographing these two brothers, Sergio and Odair Assad, these classical guitarists.
Wow.
And they had done this beautiful record of Astor Piazzolla music, and which is really beautiful music. And I was a little familiar with it. And a lot of times I'm around classical people, and the music is not in my wheelhouse. I'm not familiar with, so it's hard to. But this was music, and I was like, and it was Brussels, and it was cold and rainy, and they're from Brazil, and the music, Piazzolla's from Argentina, so they wanted the record to look like, well, you have to shoot, it's winter in Brussels, but we want this to not feel like... So,
to feel warm and South American. And
we found a way to make a picture, and it's a record that I love the way it turned out, the way it looks, and it... But I knew I also had... They said, can you get some pictures of them playing? And neither of the brothers had a place there where they were living in Brussels, and I just had this little... So I moved all the furniture as far away from the window as I could, and I got as far away from them, and it was just enough room where I could see both of them, and I didn't know what to do, and there's just enough light to fall on both of them, and I remember being sort of like comfortably in a position where I could make no more decisions. I couldn't get farther away, I couldn't get closer. All I could do was sit in this corner with my camera. I had no lenses to change. All I could do was sit there, and they started playing this music, and I know I'd let them play way longer than I needed to, and it was just like, and then another time was, and this was in, and this kind of moment has happened in lots of, but I remember specifically being in Sheffield, England, shooting a guy named Ben Taylor for his dad, James Taylor. And it was funny. It was the music business so weird because he made this beautiful record that never came out. And I think that happens sadly a lot. But and this was a record that wound up never coming out. But I went to England to shoot him. And it was like I'd never been to that part of England. Well, I'd never been. Anyway, and these hills have no trees on them. They're just barren hills. And it was like sort of gray and raining, which is sort of like where I feel most comfortable. And it was like, and I was, it was near the end of a day of shooting, and we went out, and I suggested maybe this hill might be a great place to shoot, but I would go look first. So they stayed down because it was kind of cold and rainy, and so I went up to the top of this hill, and the rain started going, really harder. And it was just this sight I couldn't believe. And I remember just just sitting down on the ground because they couldn't see me anymore. I was out of sight. And I just felt like I was the luckiest person in the world. I can't believe I just get to. And I came back down and said, there's nothing up here for us to shoot. So and it was like.
It was your experience and yours alone.
It was like, yeah.
You just used a word. Ever since I have first met you, I have heard you use a specific turn of phrase that's always interested me. You never talk about taking pictures. You talk about making pictures. And I think that represents a more comprehensive understanding of the process. Because for you, that process, and we've talked enough in the past about the darkroom process and about photographers that you admire. I should have said earlier, one of the things for people that aren't familiar with your work, you work almost exclusively, I know you do some digital stuff because you can't avoid it now, but you work almost exclusively with film and almost exclusively with natural light.
Yes.
And those are choices that you make because that's what you feel most comfortable with.
Exactly.
And that process of making a photo, it's an interesting language thing, because when you're taking a picture, there's like the Native American idea that when you take a picture of somebody, you take a piece of their soul, whereas the making a picture is a collaborative thing that you do with your surroundings and with somebody else, and it's not an instant, it's a process.
Yes.
Is that I don't know if there's a question there. It's just really interesting to me that you always use that phrase.
Yeah, and it does feel better to my ears to say that, and I think there is some, and I think there is, there is certainly enough, sort of enough to feel bad about as a photographer already. So if you start using the word like taking, which just feels more aggressive, it's maybe it's just totally selfish. As it makes me, I feel a little bit more like this is something I want to be involved with. If it doesn't sound so entitled. Yeah.
What are you still learning? And is there anything, I mean, you are, I think by all measures, people talk about mastery in different fields. You have been doing this now for 30, 40 years. I think anyone that's familiar with your work would say that you have achieved a level of mastery, but what are you trying? You just started, I don't know if you started this recently. I know that recently you have been very involved in taking the larger format wet plate prints.
Yeah.
You're still learning about, you're going back into the history of photography, you're experimenting with other mediums. What are you excited to learn, and what are you still trying to do and learn and achieve with your craft?
Oh, good question. I am interested in the. I have been doing the wet plate collodion, and I think there's been a lot of interest in that. I think it's just sort of a very natural, outgrowth of the speed at which, photography is growing digitally. That there's, it's, and I am probably, so that's not original on my part at all. It is sort of, I'm probably doing it for many of the same reasons that a lot of people are, that it sort of connects you to just how sort of magic this sort of process is. And that's what it's hard to remember when something becomes, for all the ease that has made photography as powerful as it is and accessible as, and I think those are all good things. All that's been made possible by ease, but what has been lost is, I think it can get easy to lose the sense of magic. And for me, that process is so full of like foibles and things that and it is totally physical, that it's a joy because it is mysterious, miraculous.
Do you have photography? Maybe this is the wrong question to ask because you said earlier that you don't plan things out. But do you still have things that you would like to accomplish that you're thinking of that are sort of bucket listy type of things?
Yeah, I am. There are, most of them would have the sort of like the idea of being curated into a book form. I think it's something that I think most photographers that I know that is something I've done a few books, but there are a couple that have been living in my head for more than decades. And so that feels like an open loop that I would love to. I don't know if it'll close in my lifetime, but yeah, I want to gather up and try to make sense of some of these things that move me and interest me. And I've got some certain very specific projects I'm working on right now because of I'm doing a portrait project that will be a show in October as part of the biennial Photo Focus Biennial in Cincinnati, and that may have a small book attached to it too. I'm knocking wood and hoping that will be but I'm doing portraits all over the city in a portable studio that I'm dragging around. And Brandon, there's I still want to make pictures, and I want to I think what I'm hungry to do is sort of like gather up enough pictures so when I it's a beautiful thing, I think, to have something that you can give to somebody and say that it says, this is what I was thinking. You have a you're and I'm sure you can understand this as a musician, as someone that knows a poet, that to be able to share what you care about is so. Yes, it seems like the most obvious way that I'm longing for that is for some sort of book manifestation.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you can go. Michael's website is michaelwilson.pictures.
Yes.
And you can go and see them, but there's something else about experiencing these photographs in a physical way, in a way that you can sit with them that's not on the screen. Yeah. Well, I hope that happens. I love your work and I love talking to you. Michael, I want to say thanks because I know that asking very often a visual artist to talk about their work, what's the old phrase? It's like dancing about architecture. Yeah. It's like you've been really generous with us and very kind to spend some time with us. And I could talk to you for 3 hours because I love listening to you talk about what you do. But for everybody else, go to michaelwilson.pictures, check out his work. And Michael, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you, Brandon.
This episode of the Distiller Podcast was recorded live at Arnold's Bar and Grill, 210 East 8th Street in downtown Cincinnati. Thank you so much again to Michael Wilson for joining us on the show. You can learn more about Michael's work, including finding links to his website, where you can see his extensive portfolio of portraits, including B.B. King, Emmylou Harris, Lyle Lovett, many others, by checking out this episode's page at thedistillerpodcast.com. You can also learn more about Arnold's Bar and Grill. And thanks again to the staff of Arnold's for hosting us so graciously, even as the lunch rush started to get a little busy, and for offering, but agreeing not to turn off the ringer on the old phone, because we just couldn't stand not hearing that ringer go off during the show. So thank you to everyone at Arnold's. Love that place. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production, booking, and photography from Terry Heist. For this episode, we were also joined by photographer Kyle Wolf, and some of her photos of the recording can be seen on the website as well. She's fantastic. Check that out, and check out her other photographs, which we'll link to as well. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm. You can find The Distiller on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, anywhere you find podcasts. Please subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. And if you like what you hear, please do rate or review The Distiller wherever you listen. That helps us find our audience and vice versa. You can also download episodes, find links, and like I said, more information, including photos of the guests, locations, and get in touch with us all at thedistillerpodcast.com or by email, mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. Whether it's to suggest people you think should be on The Distiller to talk about their search for meaningful work, somewhere interesting we should record the show, or something interesting we should drink while doing it, and whether by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for listening.